So, Bradley, it is with great joy that I announce that the Kellett family, there's a birth in the Kellett family, Bradley. I'm so excited to share this with you, Brad. It's big news for our family.
I'm excited.
It's a bouncing baby Mineola Tangelo. And I know what you're saying. David, that is not a child. You cannot say that that is a birth.
Yeah.
Brad, I have birthed this child. For those of you that remember, during the pandemic, when I was getting real sad, I was like, I need something to up my spirits that distracts me. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take up gardening. And so I took up a bunch of tomato gardening. Longtime listeners of the podcast will know there was a whole phase where I grew a shit ton of different types of tomatoes, gave them out to all my neighbors. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to try my hand at citrus grafting. And for those that don't know, a citrus tree, any kind of citrus tree, can be grafted onto most any other kind of citrus tree, and you can create what's called a fruit salad. You can have a tree that has like 40 different kinds of fruit on it, right? And so I was mesmerized by this idea. I was like, how hard can this be? I'm gonna figure this out. Listen, if people have been doing this for thousands of years, Dave Kellett can do it in a 2 or 3 year period of a pandemic. So I bought this equipment off online on how to splice citrus, and I signed up with this California university where you can buy state-approved, disease-free, because that's a big problem in California is disease passing between citrus trees. Disease-free twigs, basically.
Oh, my goodness.
Live twigs that they mail to you in a moist package so that they stay live. And so you have to open up this moist package. Anyway.
With a stick in it.
Yeah, with a stick, basically. Yes, with a stick. And so what you do is I don't want to bore people, but there's like 6 different ways that you could splice into a tree and get a stick to connect to its capillary system. Why are you laughing?
The visual of you opening up a box with joy on your face, and there's a stick inside of it. What's got Dad so happy? Oh, someone mailed him a stick.
Is it even better when someone in my family legitimately says, "Oh, look, it's his moist sticks"?
Oh my God!
They're moist. They were all moist.
When's the last time you were happy that somebody mailed you something that was brown and sticky?
Oh God! So yes, but with care and unfortunately with speed because you got to do it quick.
Oh yes.
Yeah, because they're mailed overnight. Believe it or not, they would come in a FedEx package. So I ordered all these different kinds of citrus, like weird random citrus, like you've never heard of, like weird varieties from Indonesia and Japan that don't necessarily grow very well in California. But I was like, by God, I'm gonna try it. And
Send me those sticks. I need more sticks.
So anyway, we are now 3.5 years later from this project, right? And a couple different ones took in different parts of the yard, but there was one on my Mexican lime tree, Brad. This is what's important.
Yes.
Let's get back to the core of the story. On my Mexican lime tree, which I planted specifically for my Coronas and my Pacificos so that I could have a little lime in my beer. I specifically planted this tree for that. So it is now a fully functioning lime tree. I get probably 100, 150 limes off of it every year. But Brad, about 2 weeks ago, I walk outside to do yard work, and I literally, because I'll be honest with you, I had kind of forgotten about a lot of my grafts. Once the pandemic was over, I was like, yeah, shine that hobby. Right. I'm done, I'm back out in the world. And I walked by my Mexican lime tree. Brad, 2 gigantic Mineola Tangelos, beautiful orange, completely different leaf, completely different fruit than the surrounding Mexican lime. Brad, I did it! 3.5 years later, I got a little baby Mineola Tangelo, Brad.
How did it taste?
Terrible. Okay.
I thought you were going to be like me with the bottle of scotch that I'm scared to open, and you were scared to bite into it.
No,
but you bit into it. It was not good.
I ran inside with one of them. The honest to God truth is, I probably got too excited and picked it too soon, and also, it is admittedly an underdeveloped citrus branch. Like it might not yet be strong enough to produce really good succulent fruit.
Right.
And so I got to kind of give it a couple more seasons. Anyway, yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't great, but I did it. What our listeners need to know is I did it. I was really sad during a pandemic, and I was like, I need a little life around me, so I started into plant horticulture and citrus grafting, and I ordered a bunch of moist sticks, Brad, and I did it. I made one of those. I turned a moist stick into a piece of fruit, Brad. It wasn't a very good piece of fruit, but I did it.
Listen, I am proud of you. That is cool that you were able to do that, and even if the fruit doesn't taste good, at least the colors, maybe it looks good when it's out there with the green and I would imagine a Tangelo is orange. It's a nice visual treat. I'm trying my best over here.
To hell with you. Here's what it is now. It's a story because you know how like the back deck, the porch, you've been to my house.
Yeah.
The back deck, there's a lime tree right there, right next to the where people sit to talk. So now at least I have a story. I'm like, have a look at that tree. Two different kinds of fruit. How do you think that happened? Do you think there were moist sticks involved? Yes, there were. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about moist sticks and making comics.
And moist sticks and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of the Webcomics Handbook on Substack and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Strip and horticulturalist, I should say, I guess.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Splicer extraordinaire. And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And for those of you wondering, because I did say that there are 6 different ways to splice in a citrus stick into another living tree.
Yeah.
And you might be saying, oh, well, Dave, did you write down which way worked that you used in that specific spot on that specific tree?
That would be really important to know.
Yeah, Dave, did you take notes so that the next time you do it, you do that method again?
Yeah.
Sure didn't, Brad. Sure didn't.
What are the chances you're ever going to do this again?
I mean, I have the equipment, but probably not.
I think it's the same chances as what are the chances we're going to have another pandemic?
So pretty strong then, I guess. Pretty.
In the next,
it's looking like bird flu in the next couple of years. Yeah. Okay. So I'll hold on to the equipment, Brad. I'll hold on to the equipment.
Hold on to that joy of getting a twig in the mail.
That's right. So, Brad, I've got a question for you that's coming over from patreon.com/comiclab, where all the cool people are going to jump in on the show and get hundreds and hundreds of bonus episodes that they've never heard called Pro Tips. But anyway, this question comes in from Zelbinian, who writes, is there a struggle or a method, Brad, to decide if it's best to get a joke or a point across using words or using illustrations? Is there a method to decide if it's best to get a joke or a point across as words or illustrations, visuals or verbals, Brad? Which one wins out to you in getting across a punchline or getting across a point?
It all depends on what that point is. It depends on the plot point. It depends on the punchline. It depends on, in my opinion, what's going to deliver the biggest impact on your reader. And sometimes it's visual. Sometimes there's a certain type of plot point that is best left visual. And sometimes
a stunning reveal, for example, maybe, right?
Or, I mean, to see a master's class in this, just Google Charles Adams and his comics for the New Yorker magazine. He was a master of visual humor, where you'd have, a whole bunch of people in a movie theater, and everybody's upset and crying and reacting with shock. And there's one guy who's happily munching popcorn, right? And the way he's composed this, your eye goes all over the theater until bang, you land right on that guy. Right. And that surprise that he's the only one happy in the theater is the humor. There's no way of doing that there's no way of doing that verbally, right? If you were to have that and then have one person say, hey, there's only one guy in the movie theater that's happy about this horrible scene that's on the screen, that's not going to work.
Yeah, it lands like a wet twig. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But There are sometimes, like, for example, some punchlines, some are very word based, very idiom based. And although there are instances where you can draw an idiom, sometimes it's just better because of the pattern of the language, because of the rhythm, because of the way that's written, that it's much better in verbal. And knowing, like, is there a method or a system or a struggle? No, it all comes down to knowing what you're doing. I've never been confused over which one I should be doing at the time. It's either a visual gag or it's a verbal gag. And of course, the best case scenario is you get a little bit of both in there, like that you've got a funny visual to go with your funny verbal or vice versa. But I don't know that I've ever sat there perplexed, scratching my head, saying, I wonder which way I should do it. It's either a verbal gag or a visual gag, or it leans in one of those two directions. Am I missing something?
Well, okay, so I have a totally different take on this, but I wanted to clarify before we move on from to my take. In your understanding, it's an intuitive gut level thing. Like, as soon as the joke is or plot point is constructed in your mind, you're like, well, this has got to be done visually, or this has got to be done verbally.
It not only a gut level, but like I said, with the Charles Adams example, it would be impossible to do it the other way. Like, there's no other way to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
That example is particularly clear, and I can't argue with that one.
Yeah.
I can see, I mean, listen, you and I have both done thousands of plot point endings or punchline endings at this point.
Yeah.
And there are examples of ones where they're more gray area, I guess I'm saying, where it could be. But I'm going to take a different take on this, which is that I think, writ large about comics, as the medium of comics, it is a medium where I think unquestionably, if you can show it rather than tell it, it is a stronger thing in this medium to show a thing rather than tell a thing. It's more compelling. There's frankly more nuance. There's sometimes a Hitchcockian way of reading into it that allows the reader to invest themselves into, rather than being told how to feel, they invest their own feeling into it in the way that Hitchcock did with some of his scenes. So I think there is a default state where it's better to show rather than tell. That being said, though, this is a mixed medium. It is a marriage of words and pictures, so you can't always default to it. As Brad said, there are punchlines that absolutely require a play of verbiage. You can't rely on the visuals to do the work. Which leads me to my second point, which is a lot of this is a skill issue.
Yeah.
And so if I have a joke that absolutely requires a dance of words, but my diction, my vocabulary, my ability to express myself in writing, I'm on year 1 or year 2, and I come from an art tradition, and my ability to make words ballet across the page is not there yet, right?
Right.
That's a skill issue. I might lean towards a visual, heavier, stronger angle than, you know what I mean? In the same way that Mobius absolutely leaned more towards visuals than writing. Because Mobius wasn't a writer, let's be honest. Right? And so, or vice versa. Burke Breathed or Gary Trudeau or Gary Larson were much stronger writers, I'm going to argue, than they were artists. Yeah. And so as a skill issue, even to this day, they might lean more on wordplay and just the dance of words than they would on visuals. So I think it's a skill issue based on where you are in your career. Do you think you're wrong? Am I wrong about that, Brad?
No, I think you have.
I'm not saying, by the way, that it's right. I'm just saying it's a skill issue where you are,
I think you're making an absolutely great point. But I literally just called up the comic that I posted on my website today. And I'll this is an example of what I'm saying. So I've got an employee orientation scene. I've introduced some new characters. They're in employee orientation, and the topic of workplace romance comes up. And the superhuman resources person says the company actually frowns on employees dating.
Sure.
And one of the characters saying that doesn't matter because with a smoke show like Lightning Lady, I'm going to ask her for a date anyway. At which point, the superhuman resources person says, if you get a date with her, the company would go through a series of Tex Avery style reactions, including bulging eyes, floor level jaw drops, a carpet like unraveling tongue, and awooga sound effects. And then there's a beat. And then she says, and then it would frown. Now, that is a verbal joke. To have tried to do that in a visual sense would have ruined it, because it's all about the verbal. It's all about the play on that phrase. You know, when people say, well, the company frowns on that. Not only would the company frown, it would be, flabbergasted that this date happened, and then it would frown.
Right.
And the verbal and then the penultimate silent panel that we talked about on Pro Tips not so long ago, and then the punchline, all of that is much, much better served in a verbal way. To have made the choice to have gone visual with that, I think would have been a mistake.
Also, and you remember before how I had recommended Hitchcock as a way of withholding certain visuals so that the reader invests themselves into it more. You can think of the shower scene.
Yeah.
You can think of the way the birds attack the telephone booth and birds. Is that by withholding certain visuals, you let the audience member invest it with their own meaning, right? But what Brad did by not drawing Tex Avery style into a comic that does not work with Tex Avery style, is he let you invest your own memories of Tex Avery's style in that world. You know what I mean? Like, by choosing the writing path, you actually enabled the writer to invest themselves more into it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so there, not only does that punchline work better verbally, and couldn't be done visually, but it actually, by having them do the visuals in their mind, it actually works better. So yes, I will agree with you on that. But all of which to say is, we do come back to how do you choose? And so you're saying that some are self-evidently visual or verbal. And I'm a little bit saying, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you that as you start to plan it out, you'll go, oh, well, this is a visual joke. Oh, well, this is a verbal joke. And then I add on to Brad's thought by saying, then it becomes a skill issue. Are you good enough yet to draw that? Are you a good enough writer yet to turn that phrase? And I will argue that maybe even if you're not, part of the 10,000 hours that you got to put in to get better is to try. Because in trying to do the visual joke or in trying to do the verbal joke, you become one step closer to being Tex Avery or being Mobius or being Bill Watterson or whoever you want to invest in your mind in terms of someone who was able to land the way they wanted to deliver that plot point or punchline.
In fact, when you look at amateur level comics posted on social media, you can see this playing out time and time again, where somebody's done, in particular, let's go right to our wheelhouse with humor comics. Somebody's done a punchline, and they have backed away from drawing the thing. And you can see, see how often this happens? And they go with the verbal, and it's like, this would have been so funny if you would have drawn it, but it's a little bit, they don't feel their skills are there. Right. Sometimes it's also laziness. Sometimes it's also laziness. It's
also that.
They just don't want to draw that thing. Right. And sometimes it's like, I could see where this would have been a real bear to draw, but you would have gotten the laugh. You would have totally killed it. So you can see very often in an amateur cartoonist where they've made the wrong decision. They backed away from the visual and went to the verbal. And that's, to your point, a part of learning, because eventually, like, the best case scenario out of that just thing that I just talked about is that, and I really think you should do this as at anyone, you and me, the person listening to us, everyone should be taking a little time to review stuff that's about 5 years old, or as old as, if 3 years old, if you've only been doing this 3 years. But it's really important to look at stuff that's quite a bit older so that you can see it with an objective eye, and you can see all of those things that you screwed up, and then you can say, I must have gotten better because I can see where I would have done that better now, or just because of your objective eye, you can see the fault, and you're just like, shit, I really missed an opportunity. I should have done a visual there. I should have written that different. Looking back over your old work with an objective eye is a big part of building what you're talking about building.
Yeah, and because I think it's helpful for us to tell on ourselves, I will say that if you go back and read through my science fiction long-form drive, there are a lot of times where I should have done an external establishing shot to let you know where we're coming into on this new chapter, this new page. I should have done an exterior long shot of a ship flying around X planet so you knew what ship it was, what planet it was, and maybe a push in on the window or something over a couple of panels, and then so instead, right to an interior, it's two heads talking to each other. You don't know where you are. You got to figure it out over the next couple panels. Not as effective. You know what I mean? And so that, just telling on myself, it revealed that I was coming from a writer's background and not an artist background. And I leaned on my ability to try to establish where you were based on what they were saying and the context clues of the words used. But that's not as good as drawing an establishing shot. And so now, Dave Kellett, 15 years on Drawing Drive, there was an establishing shot last week that I spent, no joke, 8 hours drawing this goddamn ship in a specific angle because it was a cool way to do the establishing shot. But I needed 15 years of doing Drive, getting better at doing those establishing shots, and now I can do it,
Yeah. Also, you say that that's a result of you being more of a writer than an artist, at which I co-sign.
You jerk.
No, I mean co-sign in that I feel the same way about me.
I know.
But also, and by the way, this is me too. It also is a result of you coming into comics as a newspaper comic strip person.
Yes.
And not a graphic novel person.
Right.
You came into this, your wheelhouse was as a 4-panel strip guy. And in a 4-panel strip, very rarely do you see an establishing shot because it doesn't matter, right? You go right to that dialogue.
You go right to the two talking heads,
It's all about the dialogue. And graphic novels are much more nuanced than that. So it also is a result of you having a comic strip background.
Well, again, telling on myself, I could look back through Sheldon archives and it would be, let's say it's a 4-panel strip, and the first 3 panels are two talking heads.
Yeah.
A problem that Brad and I had and still have occasionally, in terms of when we were time crunched or something. I would do 2 talking heads. And for the 4th panel, what would have been required visually is a bird's eye shot from 20 feet away, and in the background, you see the mangled bicycle, right?
Right.
So 2 things early in Dave's career that a skill issue would have been hard to do. A 3/4 angle from 20 feet up in the air, looking down on the characters that also showed an impossibly hard object to draw, a bicycle.
Right. Even
further made more difficult to draw because it was mangled.
Yeah.
And instead, what do I choose to do, Brad? I choose to stay on the 2 shot of character heads, and I delivered the punchline, and it's not as effective. You know what I mean? And so that was a skill issue.
And one of them says, "Oh, look at that mangled bicycle."
Yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. That, and I don't even there was a made up comic, but you get exactly what we're going with here. Is that because it was a skill issue, I didn't do it, and I should have at least attempted it because, honestly, comics also, we should say this, are forgiving. People are a little forgiving, especially they get where you are just intuitively in your journey. You know what I mean? I know a comic strip like Bill Watterson at the end of Calvin and Hobbes, what he should have been able to be capable of versus what Drabble is capable of.
Yeah.
And I'm forgiving of both, if you know what I mean.
No, you're right. You're right. And also, what they're leaning into in terms of their own personal strength.
Right.
So, I agree.
But I'm saying as a reader, you also make allowances of like, oh, I see Drabble's going for a visual joke there. And within the world of Drabble, that is a good, you know what I mean? A good visual presentation. So,
but like to answer this person's question, is there a method Is there a struggle? Method? No, there's no method. In other words, there's no way that I can give you a clever mnemonic advice.
If these 6 rules are triggered, then visual. If these 4 rules are triggered, then verbal. Yeah.
But struggle, yes, in that it's something that you learn the way you learn everything else in comics, by making mistakes and going back. I can't stress this enough. Going back over your old work objectively and saying, how could I have done that better? How could I have done that? And you know, like for me, it usually happens when I do a new book, when I'm finally holding that book in my hands, and it's a different format than seeing it on the screen. I'm seeing it very objectively for the first time in that book. Yeah. And I'm paging through it, and it's like, that transition didn't work really well. I gotta work on that when I'm in the moment doing these pages, because like establishing shots like that, sometimes I forget to do establishing shots for several pages, and I'm like, what the hell's happening? I'm the one that wrote this. I don't know what's happening here. That's what you got to do, and that's important to do. Is to give yourself that self-critique. Yeah. Of saying, oh man, this really didn't work.
Yeah. And the sort of final capstone for me on this topic is that once you have made the gut check that, oh, this is a visual presentation, oh, this is a verbal presentation. Once you've made that gut check, the thing that I think both Brad and I would recommend for you is that the next step is bravery. You have to just do the thing. Yep. Is it going to be maybe an embarrassing execution? Maybe, but maybe you'll land it. And in trying it, at the very least, you become 1% better at doing that kind of panel or that kind of presentation for the next time you try it. So honestly, once you've made the gut check that verbal or visual is the approach to use, then it's a matter of bravery and trying your best at it.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Well, Dave, we're near the midpoint of the show, and we always like to do little updates at the midway point. And I've got a really exciting update to share with us right now.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
And that is that I think there's like 1 day left on dogkickstarter.com, the new Anatomy of Animals book. And there's a couple reasons I'm excited about this. The first reason is that I always like watching you do a Kickstarter. I know in the future on Comic Lab, we're going to go down and do a post-mortem where we go in and we always share real numbers about what's working, what strategies are not working. And I think that's valuable for our listeners. But I'll tell you what's even more valuable for me is that I know for a fact that I've got at least 5 whiskey sours coming to me on Reuben weekend. And by the way, I don't know where that's at this recording. I don't know when you're hearing this, how much more, but 5 is like, it's going to cover Friday night. We've got a whole lot of nights to go through yet. And so if you get a chance, not only can you go to dogkickstarter.com, but go over to my Blue Sky where you're going to see me using a special tracking link. Code. If you use that, I get a whiskey sour for every pledge I send Dave's way. And we got to get on this because 5 ain't going to do it for the entire weekend.
I like how we've gamified that in a way that like also brings in folks to dogkickstarter.com, but also makes Brad just a sloppy drunk at the Rubens.
Yes, I've
just a sloppy drunk.
I've taken on my persona very well.
If you're at the Rubens this year, if you're questioning who it was that threw up on the back of Jim Davis's tux, it was Brad Geiger after 5 bottom shelf whiskey sours.
Yeah, well, the one thing I got to do is remember to turn my name tag over before I start vomiting, or else Jim Davis won't know who it is.
Yeah, that's right. But no, yes. So that is an update for the show, is that dogkickstarter.com ends, I think, tomorrow, March 14th, depending on when this airs. March 14th at 2 p.m. it ends. And the reason we always ended at 2 p.m. on a Friday is because I think we just kind of exhaustedly go to the weekend. We're just like, that's it. Let's close the studio. I don't want to work till 5. Let's just go collapse onto a couch, because it's exhausting to run a well-done Kickstarter. It is exhausting. Beth specifically produces 800 different images for these damn things. There's so many images to produce for a Kickstarter. But I also want to thank everybody that's jumping in, because I'm really proud and happy with this book. This I might be the best of all the anatomy books. I feel like we've hit the ground running in a topic that we love, which is dogs.
Of course.
So if you are a dog lover, or if you've got somebody in your life for Christmas that you want to give a dog book to, dogkickstarter.com. It ends March 14th, 2 p.m.
Absolutely. And of course, the other good thing about dogs is they're always fetching sticks. And that's another
keep them away from my moist sticks, Brad. Keep them away.
And one more update before we go back to the show, and that is the other fun thing that's happening today is that the 3rd episode of The Wrong Way Show is going public as we speak.
That's right.
Dave Kellett, Kevin McShane, and me, all of us drawing a character. This time it's going to be Shrek. We're going to try to draw Shrek the wrong way. You can go check that out at wrongwayshow.com. You can also get it on YouTube at youtube.com/@wrongwayshow. So go check it out. We are having so much fun doing that show.
Oh my God.
It's been amazing. And the response we're getting to that show has been off the hook.
Absolutely. And what's so fun is when you've got 3 in the can for something like this, you can start to see it getting its sea legs in the best possible way. Like, I can see this now. If the fates are smiling, I can see us doing this for years and years and years and years and years, because it's so damn much fun to do. And people legitimately love what we're trying to do, which is draw a character that you know and love in a way that won't get us sued and is still a damn delight to watch being drawn. And so far, we're nailing the assignment. I love, love, love what Brad and Kevin produced in terms of Shrek. It's ridiculous. So go check it out over at wrongwayshow.com. You will not be disappointed, friends.
All right. So, Dave, let's go back into another really fun question. And this is a topic that you wanted to bring up because we got talking before the show about world building versus writing.
Oh, yes. Okay. So this has come up with, and I'm not throwing anyone specifically under the bus, because it comes up much more than you would think.
A lot.
We have had dozens, I want to say over the years, dozens and dozens and dozens of question askers over at Patreon that and on the Discord server that talk about, and you sort of read between the lines sometimes, and sometimes they say it explicitly, where you can tell they have been world building for years, years and years, sometimes decades, Brad.
Yes.
Building this world, crafting this world, but they have not written a story in this world. So the world building is beyond. It's decades of thinking about this world. And yet they have not allowed themselves to play in this world yet and tell an actual story. Not even a 6-pager, not even a 16-pager, never mind the 600-pager in their mind's eye that they have hope for. So what do we make of that, Brad? What is that, and what do we advise on how to break out of that?
Well, those are 2 great questions. I'm going to take the second one first, how to break out. Because what happens is, where Dave and I come in, is that the question that they have is, how do I get started?
Yes.
That's usually the question, is how do I get started? And then we find out, oh yeah, I've been world building for a long time, and I've got all this stuff on my mind. And we've said on the show before, if you've got one of these 200-page epics in mind, the worst thing you can do is to start writing that epic. It really is terrible strategy to say, okay, I've been world building for a couple decades now. Now I'm going to start on page 1 of this 200-page epic. Terrible strategy. What I want you to do is to first write a short story. Get something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because you're going to find that that's harder than it sounds. And you're going to learn so much in doing that short story that when you do start working on that big epic, you're going to be much more well equipped. So go into the Comic Lab archives and look for the short story challenge, where I talk about going through the story circle and doing like an 8 to 16 page short story based on the story circle. And the actual story circle. I see sometimes people take a couple points from the story circle. They'll take a couple of spots from the hero's journey. They'll throw some advertising jargon in there. It's like, no, you gotta stay focused here with me. To go in and do the actual story circle, the way it's presented, and execute a story. Just a story, beginning, middle, and end, and then bring it into the Critique Central channel at Discord and get some thoughts on it. Get somebody to really tell you, hey, here's what's working. Here's what needs to be improved. That stuff is way more important. And I know you want to start on the 200-page epic, but I guarantee you, if you don't learn how to do beginning, middle, and end with not just one short story, maybe a couple, 2, 3 short stories until you really know what you're doing, till you know you can execute that well, then start on your epic. If you don't, you're going to be one of the hundreds, and I mean it's hundreds of people who start a story like this, get halfway through, and they're like, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do next.
Yeah. I mean, yes, that's true. That is the case. In my mind, the ones that I'm specifically worried about are the ones that have years and years and years and years and years and decades of world building, but not even the first step. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Never mind the half-attempted story, just not even the first step. And so is it fear? Is that what it is? Or is it that in story building, you a little bit get to share it, in world building, you a little bit get to share the story without having to do the work of sharing the story. So you get the serotonin hit, but you don't have to put in the work. So is it a mix of fear, but also like false serotonin for something that should require more work? Is that the answer for what's going wrong here?
I think both of those things in equal measure. Fear, absolutely, because if I haven't started, I can't fail.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that fear absolutely plays into it. And that's, by the way, another reason I want you to go in there and do some short stories is to build your confidence up, right? Because part of what is keeping you from doing this is fear. And then the other part, like you said, is along with that fear, they're getting a certain amount of serotonin hit just by doing the world building and probably talking about it with their friends. Oh yeah, that's that comic I'm going to write one of these days. It's going to have a guy, he's going to have a magic suit of armor, and it's going to be like this and like that. And years ago, this goes back to Webcomics Weekly. Mm-hmm. Dave said something that stuck with me for ever since. And that was, he says,
oh, I remember this. Brad, you need to shower. Was that what?
Yeah. I remember you pulled me aside and you said, they got this stuff now. It's called soap and water. And I want you to look into it.
I don't know why. Here, by the way, Brad was about to probably compliment me. And here out of nowhere, I insult him for no reason. What friendship? All right,
You're still stinging from that time where you thought I was saying you were a bad writer, but I was just saying that I'm a bad writer too.
I'm still mad that your visual made you laugh about me getting sticks in the mail. Just like an excited Dave tearing open a FedEx package.
Oh my God.
But okay, so what did I tell you years ago? I'm sorry.
But you said when you've got a new project, you never tell anybody about it.
Yes. Because it's dangerous.
Yes. Talking about it takes the place of doing it. And you know that the more you talk about it, the less likely you are to do anything about it.
Because you're cheating the process. When you share a story without taking action on the story, you're getting the oxytocin or serotonin, depending on how you want to say it.
Yeah.
You're getting the hit of joy of sharing the thing without putting any of the work in. So what happens? You end up not putting the work in to do the thing.
And you do a whole lot of talking.
Shared it, wink, wink, with your friends or the people around your dinner table or whatever. So you cannot talk about a new project until you've actually put into the work for it because you're cheating yourself. So, but yes, both Brad and I have projects where we try actively, even with our friend, to not talk about it because it steals the thunder from doing the work on the project, you know?
Yeah.
So a little bit world building is the same kind of thing. It steals the thunder from doing the project because in some way, shape, or form, you feel like you're sharing it.
Yeah.
You feel like you're getting the serotonin hit of releasing art into the world. But part of this, though, too, is that do they think they're doing more world building than they actually are, if you know what I
mean? We were talking about this pre-show, and you were like, but listen, this person's been doing world building for like maybe 10, 20, maybe even 30 years. They've been doing a lot of work. And I'm like, you're being much more generous than I am. I think this person, most of this stuff is happening between the ears, right? It's a lot of thinking, maybe a lot of talking, not a lot of doing. And if we were to print everything that this person actually wrote, if we printed it all out onto letter-sized sheets of paper, I think that you might get a stack that might be an inch tall, maybe an inch and a half. I got a feeling that you're giving them credit for maybe 6 inches or a foot of paper. But I think a lot of this stuff is all talk and no action. And worse yet, it's between the ears, which is like worthless until you put it down on paper and real. Right. Because I'll give you an example. You're like, last February, you might have been thinking that the economic system of this world that you're building is it's a feudalistic system. It's got kings and you're a serf that lives out, that's a peasant living on the king's land and all this other stuff. And it's like, when I build this world, it's going to have that. It's going to have kings and serfs. It's going to have those guys. And then later on, you're thinking about, I have no idea, but what kind of clothes they're wearing. And you're giving them these suits of armor and so forth. Mm-hmm. And one of your peasants has a suit of armor. And it's like, one of these peasants, he's going to have this weapon, and it's going to be a really great weapon. And until you write that all down and see it in front of you, you don't realize that that peasant, if it really wasn't a feudalistic system, couldn't have that kind of armor, couldn't have that kind of weapon because they wouldn't have those resources. But because you haven't put it on paper, because you haven't done the work yet, that thought that you had about feudalism in February was a great thought. It makes and you walked away thinking, I'm doing world building. This is great. And then last March, when you were talking about the weapon, you also gave yourself credit for doing all kinds of world building. But until you did the work to put it all on paper, you didn't realize that those two things, they're never going to work in the same story.
Right. And honestly, some of the best world building that I've ever done only comes in the act of telling the story.
Right.
And by that, I mean, yes, Bibles are important. Bibles, for those that aren't familiar, Bibles are sort of the skeletonized world of the story, character things, world things. A Bible is important before starting a story. Both Brad and I, with Evil Inc. and with Drive, had a skeletonized version of a Bible, even if it was just in our head, of what the world entailed. But only in doing the story can some of the best world building come out. And you have to allow for the happy accidents. And if you've crafted all of this world building, and then you start to tell the story, and you as a storyteller say, well, I can't do that because on page 28 of my world building, I've got it. No, if the story requires it, do it, and then change the world building. That's the thing. That's the thing a lot of people don't talk about. Like Tolkien had a skeletonized version of his world, made shit up as he went, and then went back and changed the shit that didn't make sense, in accordance with his new world building. He didn't spend 40 years crafting the world. He spent 40 years writing the story, and the world developed in the story itself. So it's only in the act of doing that the world is best realized and frankly, fully realized. So You got to tell the story is the short point. You got to tell the story.
All the more reason I want you to write short stories first, because then you're going to see that you've got certain story points that aren't going to line up. You're going to see. It's going to be the way that you figure all this stuff out. I want to, before you, if you've got an epic in mind, I really do want to see 4 or 5 or 6 short stories. It's not a waste of time. Yeah,
No,
I know.
no.
Right now you're yelling at me. You're saying, I'm not going to, it's going to take even longer to do my 200-page epic if I do that. No, that this is all stuff that later on is going to be Kickstarter extras or Patreon extras or just nice stuff for the back of your book. You see it all the time with people who are really good at doing this. They give you that big boom. Here's this story. Ain't it great? And then you get to the back of the book and you're like, here's how I came about that. Here's a couple of short stories I wrote. Some of it still connects with the world that I built.
Yes.
Some of it is how I found out that world was bupkis and I had to change certain things. Short stories. And also just because if you've never done a story, you don't know how hard it is to write a story with an ending. How hard it is to write a story that somebody cares enough about to get all the way to the ending, even if it's only 8 pages. To write a story where a character has motivation that makes sense, for them to have emotions that make sense. All of that stuff that is key in storytelling is much more complicated than whether you have a feudalistic system or your system runs on gold or silver or whether it runs on magic. All that stuff is bupkis compared to, can I keep your attention for 8 pages, make you care about a character on page 2, make that motivation clear on page 5, end it, make it make sense by page 8. That stuff is hard. And you don't find, I'm sorry. There's 110 books that'll tell you, well, here's what you do. And they're all great to read. I love them all, but you don't find it in a book.
You find it by doing it.
By doing it and falling on your face and doing it again. And that's why I really, please, for the love of God, write some short stories.
Yeah. Set them in your world. Have fun with it. It can be a super side tertiary character. Like imagine if George Lucas, before he wrote Star Wars, right? The accidental masterpiece that is Star Wars. Because let's be honest, George Lucas not a great writer. But the accidental before he wrote his accidental masterpiece, what if he cut his teeth writing an 8-page short story about this character Boba Fett, who was just, you see him glancingly reference the Empire. You see him walking through the world that is Star Wars.
Yeah.
And then we didn't find out about this short story for years afterward. And he's like, oh, by the way, here's me just experimenting. We would eat it up. We would love it, right?
Yes, we would.
Because it was him cutting his teeth in what this world looked and felt like. It was him cutting his teeth in what it meant to tell a story in that world. You can do something like that, and it doesn't have to be throwaway. Like Brad said, you put it at the back of the book when the first volume is collected and be like, hey, gang, look at this early proto version. That doesn't have to match up. Readers are forgiving. Here's our proto version of what this character was when I was first experimenting with this world, Gives you a chance to walk in those shoes and what that world feels like. Gives you a chance to work out the authorial tone that you're going to use. Gives you a chance to work out what is seen and not seen, shown and not shown in your world and your way of writing.
Yeah.
Brad is right. The short story is a great way to experiment with the world that you've been taking too long to world build.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's our best advice on the topic. Dave, I think we've got one more question here that we can take relatively quickly. I'm going to read it to you. And it comes in from our friend Chance, who's a Patreon backer. Chance says, we've all worked customer service jobs before, like retail, food service, call centers, etc. And those jobs can be very hard because of the occasional nasty customer. Seeing as you both have been running your Patreon campaigns for many years, I'm curious to know how similar running a Patreon is to working a customer service job. What skills can we pick up in our first jobs that will be useful later? And what skills are unique to running a Patreon that you can only learn by doing it? And of course, how do you handle the occasional nasty customer if they're a Patreon backer? Thanks a million for all the great advice and encouragement. It means the world. So let's give them a good answer as to how do customer service and Patreon intersect?
I love this. And Chance, this is a great question. And I'm sort of curious to see how Brad and I might differ on this one. But let me ask you this, though, Brad, before we get into this.
Yeah.
Just for funsies, what were the first 3 jobs that young Brad Geiger had in life?
Yeah. Well, okay. So the first job I would have had was probably McDonald's. I worked in McDonald's and worked all the different positions.
That's right.
I worked as a cook. I worked up front. I worked in the drive-through. And by the way, loved it. I had a really, it was a very worthwhile thing. And also, just back then, we were actually grilling burgers on a grill. You walk into McDonald's now, you see them pulling those plastic trays out. And it's bleh.
Microwaved
Yes. We were actually cooking food. I loved it. It was
so
great.
McDonald's, if you're listening, send the $5 gift card to Brad Geiger, care of Evil Inc. Studios, Philadelphia, PA. But okay, so that was job number 1.
So
what was job number 2?
Job number 2, my dad worked in a tool and die factory, and summers I would work in the factory with him, doing any number of odd jobs, getting metal slivers underneath of my fingernails, and sitting at lunch with all these guys who would sit there and say, whatever you do, go, because this was like during college, I would work, go back to that fucking college and make sure you don't end up like us. That was beat into my head.
Oh, really?
Day after day at that lunch table. This is what you do in the summer, so you don't have to do it forever. Get the fuck out of here.
Wow.
That was
that kind of life
bludgeoned.
advice is always like, oh, you get it. And you're like, all right, I guess I'll go back to college.
Yeah. That was bludgeoned into my head. I'm trying to think of what my third job would have been. Oh, well, I mean, so the third one, I was an intern at a hospital in the public relations department right after college. And it was only one summer, but I had a blast. It was a lot of fun. Okay, this is going to make the show go over. You got time for a quick story?
Yeah.
To get the job as an intern, I had to get a physical. And during the physical, they found a lump in my thyroid gland.
Thank God you said thyroid. I didn't know where this was going to go. Not that you want it in your thyroid either, but anyway, keep going.
They said, we really should have a look at that. And I'm like, okay. And so long story short, I had to have an operation. They took it out and it was benign. And a month later, I was bringing a group of older ladies through on a tour, and my oncologist sees me in the hallway, and he comes up to me, he says, "Brad, how are you doing?" And immediately his fingers go up to my throat and start feeling up and down my throat, asking me how I am.
So much for HIPAA laws and patient privacy.
He said, yeah, exactly.
He immediately grabs you and he's like, "Turn your face and cough, please."
Yes. And so he said, I'm doing fine. Thank you so much. And as he's walking away, I turned to the ladies and I said, "It's okay. He's my oncologist." One of the ladies looks at me and says, "Thank God he wasn't your proctologist."
Come on, lady in Bad Axe, Michigan. That's a great joke. Great joke.
I was an intern at a public relations for a hospital. Yeah.
Okay.
What were your 3 jobs?
So my first job ever was I was an umpire for little kids Little League.
Oh, love it.
And yes, I did get hit in the nuts by a thrown pitch. So in case anyone's wondering, proud moment there. My second jobs, I had a couple over a course of high school and summer. I was a bus boy and then a back waiter. I never got to be a waiter, but I was a bus boy and a back waiter. So somewhat customer serving, but not really.
Yeah.
And then my final of the 3 jobs was I worked in a bookstore. I worked in what used to be Borders, if you know those.
I remember Border Books,
They went bankrupt. But I worked in a Borders bookstore. And so those are my first 3 jobs. Vaguely customer. The only reason I asked is because we do have you also, by the way, you didn't mention my favorite job you ever had, which was working in a video game arcade.
Yeah, I did. I did that too. I was just a stone's throw away from the house, and I would go and watch the video store. I'll tell you off the air why I thought he brought me in at certain times. I think this guy was doing things along with running the video store, and sometimes I was just watching.
He was doing heroin. That's what he was doing.
But yeah, I also watched a video store for a while.
So anyway, all of which to say is both Brad and I do have younger experience, as does everybody, with customer service and the idea of dealing with good people, bad people, smart people, not so smart people, all sorts of things. And one of the things that customer service taught me that I will mention here is that, especially in written missives from patrons and Kickstarter backers and people that have purchased something from my store.
Yeah.
Working in customer service taught me that I should not ascribe to malice what can more easily be ascribed to, hey, I'm not a very good writer, or hey, I'm not very good at expressing my thoughts, or hey, I'm rushed and I just want to tell you that this book got damaged in shipping, or hey, I didn't get my thing, or hey, what's wrong? And so I guess another way to say it is the wrong way to take it is to say, oh, I'm mad. These people insulted me. Yep. The right way to take it is just to say, people aren't good at emailing. I'm sure they meant the best. Like, assuming the best when people have customer servicey type moments. You know what I mean?
Right.
Hey, my book didn't arrive. Hey, this thing, the Patreon, the PDF is not downloading. Oh, this or that. Usually they are coming at it with the best of emotion. And if you just imagine a smile behind the email, it makes most things fine. You know what I mean? Like, don't take umbrage with it. Right. That's the one bit of customer servicey things that I have taken into my patronage, my Kickstarter, my store management, and frankly, even running a Comic-Con booth. What is your takeaway, Brad, from what customer service has taught you as you run a Patreon, for example?
So when I read this question, I recoiled physically at the idea of customer service and Patreon. And it's hard for me to put my thoughts into words, except to say that I think that almost everything from customer service is very good to develop for being for crowdfunding in general, Patreon specifically. In other words, that empathy that you just mentioned, very good developing that in customer service and bring it over into Patreon. Professionalism is another thing that you learn in customer service. Projecting an air of friendliness it is a customer service thing that's great. Consistency, being knowledgeable. There's a lot of things that cross over. So at first you're like, oh yeah, you're like Chance. There's probably be a lot of stuff that comes over. Here's the only problem that I have with that. And this is what made me recoil. The main tenet of customer service is the customer's always right. And that's where I recoil, because you cannot have that attitude as an artist. You cannot have that attitude as a creative person.
Yes.
You can't have that attitude running a Patreon. In fact, what we find is a lot of times the customer's wrong. They're just absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
And we tell you right out on this show, the opposite of the customer's always right. What we tell you is never listen to a reader. Always listen to your readers, right? Never listen to one reader. Pay attention to what they're doing as a group, but never, ever listen to one reader. And that's the opposite of the customer's always right mentality.
Can I just tell you right from the outset, you have such a better and more interesting take on this than I do. Because I was thinking of it as, hey, small complaint about this or that.
Yeah.
Whereas you're taking it from the more interesting angle, which is feedback from a reader, feedback from a patron, feedback from a Kickstarter about how things should be done in the comic.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting counterpoint to keep in mind, and frankly, far more interesting than my thought, which is, hey, just be nice to people, which was my version of it. Yeah. But yeah, you're right, though, that it is not a customer service. When it comes to the creation of the comic itself, is what, if I can try to summarize what you're saying. When it comes to the creation of the comic itself, customer service has very little, if not nothing, to do with the creation of the comic.
Mm-hmm. And even I would only allow it a limited involvement in my business. No, I'll say it straight out. A limited involvement in your business decisions, and I'll tell you why. What happened when the very first day we went out and brought the Wrong Way show out in front of people? We had one person saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get Wrong Way merchandise. Can't wait to see that on a t-shirt." And here's another Comic Lab maxim. The first person to ask for that on a t-shirt is the first person to disappear when you put it on a t-shirt.
Yep.
And I'm not saying this person directly. I'm sure this guy, because I know who he is, I'm sure he'll buy the t-shirt. But business decisions, if you let your business decisions get directed by a customer comment, I'd like to see that on a t-shirt.
Or a few voices, yes.
Yes. So yeah, not only creative decisions, but many business decisions, Patreon decisions. What I've found very often is that the customer is wrong. If you're working in a coffee shop, customer one comes in, says that coffee's too hot, then the coffee's too hot. You fix that coffee. Customer two comes in, that coffee's too cold. Coffee's too cold. You fix that coffee. Yeah. You don't have anything to do but to cater to that customer. Whereas, Dave, so many times, I have so many. I've already told you the one 100 times on this show about how when I switched from black and white to color, I got a ton of angry email. They wanted the black and white comic back. Those customers were wrong. They were absolutely wrong. And because I didn't know shift from Shinola back then, I took a customer's always right attitude and fucked myself up. Because do you remember what I did? I had the guy that was running our websites do a special button.
I was so disappointed in that.
It was the wrongest thing to do in the world. But then I set it up so that those people that said that they wanted the black and white, they could click a button, and then that was set a cookie. And then every time they came to my website, the comic would be black and white for them. And I did a black and white version and a color version for every single comic that I did. Dumbest thing I ever did, right? But it was a customer service mentality. Customers are always right. I got a bunch of email. They want black and white. I got to do black and white. I rebooted the comic in, 2016? Rebooted that comic. I still get people say, "Oh, are you ever going to bring the pre-reboot back? I love the comic so much when it was pre-reboot." Well, a customer service mentality says I better be starting to plan on bringing that pre-reboot back. Would be the dumbest thing I'd ever do is to bring that. But people are saying, I had just last one. I had 3 mad scientists on my roster. 3 mad scientists, right? The first thing I did with the reboot is I got rid of 2 of them. How many mad scientists do you need running around the evil ink for crying out loud? Yeah. People still say, "Oh, I missed that other doctor. when are you bringing that guy back?" Never. I'm not going to go back and remake the same mistakes I made. Customer service mentality as a creative professional, not only in creative decisions, but in many business decisions, that the customer is always wrong.
Okay, so I want to amend my answer to say Brad's right. So yes, maintain kindness, maintain professionalism, maintain courtesy, maintain timeliness, maintain good service. Both Brad and I will agree that is the case. But when it comes to a creative life and creative decisions, even when they're business creative decisions, do I do X or Y? You have to listen to yourself, not your customer base. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
I will say that. So that's A. I will also say, for the benefit of our European, Australian, and Kiwi listeners, you might have missed it, but Brad used one of the best American phrases ever a second ago. When he said, it's one of my favorite phrases, and I just want to teach it to you because it's a great one. He said, "I don't know shit from Shinola," which is the most Midwestern phrase you could use, by the way. So Brad's from Michigan, upper northwest of the upper middle of the U.S., and shit from Shinola, basically. So Shinola was a shoe polish from the 1910s, 1920s, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And basically, you can imagine what it looked like. And so the phrase, "I don't know shit from Shinola," took off and is still used 100 years later. Even though, and this blows my mind, Shinola went defunct as a brand for like 30 years, gone. But the phrase was so omnipresent in U.S. vernacular, they brought the brand back.
Yes.
Like 30 years later as a totally different brand, by the way. It's like, I don't even think they make shoe polish anymore. They make watches and bags and shit now.
Oh, really?
It's
You can get a
Detroit-based.
you can get a Shinola handbag?
Yes, you can.
Because that's another idiom, is shit in a handbag.
Oh, you're right, but I don't know. But anyway, it's just such a weird, classic Midwest Americanism. I don't know shit from Shinola, because it's just a fun thing to say. I don't know shit from Shinola.
That shows you the power of rhetoric. It shows you the power of a really well-crafted phrase. Oh, the only thing that makes that work is the two SH sounds and the rhythm of it. I don't know, ship from Shinola. Bop, 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 bop.
Yeah.
It's musical. The power. That's the power of rhetoric. Is what kept that phrase alive for 100 years.
Yeah. Well, also, we don't need to go into the topic, but language holds on to phrases long after. Like, we are long past the steam age in terms of major motorcycle or motor vehicles, in terms of trains and stuff. We still say blowing off steam, blow your deck. Blow off a head of steam, all that sort of stuff. We don't have steam power anymore. But anyway, language, yes. All of which to say, Brad used an incredible phrase, shoot, I don't know shit from Shinola. So, but as far as customer service, I think Brad has it right, is the capstone to this. I think, yes, be professional. Yes, be kind. Yes, be courteous. Yes, be seeking to make things right when things go wrong in terms of shipping or product or this or that. But when it comes time to the customer service, Brad, of the comic itself,
then the customer's always wrong. It's got to be you. Don't listen to your reader. Always listen to your readers. That's an important thing. We always throw that in there because we don't want you to get into this thing. Well, I'm just writing the comic for myself. No, you got to still listen to your audience as a group, as a big group. You just can't get bogged down to what individuals say. For example, I'll tell you what. You might have a whole bunch of people that might write in and say, hey, Brad, Dave, we want you to do a 2-hour show. Well, customer's always wrong. At some point, we've got to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab. The show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Oh, your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, who does, in fact, know shit from Shinola. He is the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
Oh my God. Now we have to title this show What's Brown and Sticky, because all of this has a theme.
We're not calling the show What's Brown and Sticky. Editorial foot going down. We are not calling the show What is Brown and Sticky.
Good thing you're not a customer. And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com. Also, you've just got mere moments before you're going to be too late to get dogkickstarter.com and get some awesome prizes for your pledge.
I will say yes, and I'm super proud of this book, dogkickstarter.com. We have unlocked a bunch of stretch goals, making your book super cool at no additional cost to you. Please, I'm asking you because I know you're going to love it. I know it's a great gift for you or the people in your life that love dogs. Head over to dogkickstarter.com before we end on Friday, March 14th at 2 p.m. And I will say the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, and we know that you do, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. You can also head over to Spotify. Now listen, if you're listening this far into the show and you haven't gone over to Spotify and gotten us a 5-star review yet, not for nothing, but this is another one of those things where you got to get busy, just like you keep talking about world building and not doing it. This is something you got to do today. Go over there to Spotify, give us a 5-star review. Stop with this old, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Do it right now. Spotify, 5-star review.
Do you see the street in Philly coming out on Brad there? You gotta get over there and give us a 5-star review. I will say Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So I will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/My Tangelos Taste Terrible. Oh.
My other favorite, and it's so hard to say, I didn't know whether to shit or wind my wristwatch.